I was sure I had buried it very deep in a faraway place. But when I came home, it was sitting right on my bed. My name is Irene, 25 years old, and I worked in the field of interior design. During a trip, I happened to stop by a second-hand shop tucked away behind a tree-lined road. While I was engrossed in observing the old clocks, my eyes suddenly stopped at a beautiful doll placed in the corner of a shelf. It wore an old pure white dress, and its curly blonde hair was neatly combed. What stood out was its pair of deep, bright blue eyes that were eerily striking, making it impossible for me to look away. Because I found the doll so captivating, I decided to buy it and bring it home. I placed it on the shelf in my bedroom, thinking it would make a perfect decoration. That night, I was awakened by a strange sound. A very faint giggle echoed somewhere in the room. I sat up and looked around, but there was nothing. But as soon as I lay back down, a whisper soft as the wind brushed past my ear.
We will play together forever.
I sprang up immediately, my heart pounding. The room was still pitch dark and silent. The next day, when I returned home after work, I froze. The doll was no longer on the shelf. It was lying in the middle of my bed. I checked around, but nothing was stolen, and there were no signs of a break-in. I sighed in relief, placed the doll back on the shelf, thinking maybe I had brought it to bed myself and forgotten. But from that day on, every morning when I woke up, I found it in a different place. On the windowsill, at the foot of the bed. But from that day on, every morning when I woke up, I found it in a different place. On the windowsill, at the foot of the bed. I began to lose sleep, feeling as if invisible eyes were watching me in the dark. Finally, I decided to put the doll in the closet and lock it tightly. But just as I turned off the light to sleep, a dry click sounded. I froze. In the darkness, I heard small footsteps slowly approaching the bed. Trembling, I reached out and turned on the light. The doll was sitting on the pillow right next to me. I screamed, threw it to the ground, and ran out of the room. The next morning, I decided to bury the doll in a deserted field, more than 30 kilometers from the city. I stood silently looking at the freshly filled hole beneath my feet, silently hoping everything would end there. But as I turned to walk away, I seemed to hear a faint giggle rising from underground. Terrified, I ran to my car and quickly drove off, not daring to look back. That night, I returned home in a state of exhaustion. When I opened the door to my room, my blood seemed to freeze. The doll was sitting on my bed, its hair in a mess, its dress covered in dirt, and its bright blue eyes glowing with a ghostly gleam.
You thought you could abandon me?
I recently moved into an old apartment building in Vienna. Though the infrastructure is a bit run down, I didn't mind too much. It's quiet here, which matters to me. I'm a writer. My work is sensitive to noise. It easily breaks my thought flow. The apartment next to mine belongs to Elisa, a very friendly single mother. Her son, Lucas, is around 8 years old, well-mannered and polite. At the end of the hallway lives Konrad Weiss, A man in his late 20s, tall and thin, with hair that always covers his face. No one knows what he does for a living. He keeps to himself, rarely speaks to anyone. We only ever spoke once a few days ago. It was the night of a blood moon. I went out onto the communal balcony to get a good view and snap some photos. As I raised my phone to capture the moon, I noticed Conrad had appeared in the corner of my frame, startling me a bit. It was the first time I'd seen him outside. So he likes blood moons too. He looked unwound, leaning against the railing, holding a glass filled with a deep red liquid that shimmered under the moonlight. A cold, metallic scent drifted past me on the breeze that chilled down my spine. Not wanting to be awkward, I walked over and joked, "Red wine under the moonlight? You're more sophisticated than I expected."
It's not wine, but yes, the moon pairs nicely with it.
I had no idea what he meant. I just forced a chuckle and went back inside without another word. A few weeks after I moved in, the city was shaken by a string of strange deaths. Cats and dogs were found in dark alleys, completely drained of blood, their bodies shriveled. Then it was people. 3 victims in 1 week, all found inside their own homes. No signs of forced entry. The media called it the Vienna Bite. Theories range from a deranged killer to cult rituals. I felt a creeping fear. That night, I made sure my door was securely locked before heading to bed. But around midnight, I heard it. The faint, slow sound of someone turning my doorknob. The metal handle twisted ever so slightly, then stopped. I couldn't sleep at all after that. The next morning, I told Elisa what happened. She didn't believe me. She just gave me a nervous laugh and said I was letting the news get to me, imagining things. I wasn't so sure. My instincts told me otherwise. And that very day, Lucas went missing. Eliza had stepped out without locking the door, leaving Lucas at home alone. When she returned, he was gone. She called the police immediately.
It's my fault. I should have watched him more carefully. Do you think he was taken and drained like the others?
Drained? Something stirred in my gut. When the police arrived, I told them to check Conrad's apartment. They broke down the door, and what we saw was a glimpse of hell. Dozens of blood bags, jars of organs floating in strange fluids, a notebook filled with detailed entries on each victim, and in the center of the room, a bed. Lucas was there, unconscious but alive. His mouth was taped shut, his wrists and ankles bound. Thank God he was still breathing. In the inner room, they found Conrad. He was asleep, standing upright in a coffin, arms folded across his chest. Conrad was arrested. He showed no remorse. He was diagnosed with paranoid delusions. He claimed to be a vampire, said he needed to consume blood to prevent his body from decaying. He had killed others before moving to our area. Eventually, he was sentenced to life in prison. It's a fitting end. After that, Lucas suffered serious psychological trauma. Elisa decided to move away to get better care for him. He stopped talking to me the way he used to. His eyes seemed deep, hollow. I stayed behind, still living here, and still writing. But now and then, around 3 a.m., I swear I hear the slow, deliberate turn of a doorknob.
I was an online seller and had just moved into a new house to support my business. Luckily, I found a rather spacious house in a small neighborhood, and the rent was incredibly reasonable. During the first few nights living there, I was often awakened by the sound of scissors echoing from the next room. I thought to myself, could it be a thief? Summoning all my courage, I went out to check. But as soon as I opened the door, the sound disappeared, and the door to the other room remained tightly shut. Everything seemed normal, as if nothing had happened, so I tiredly returned to my bedroom. A while later, I was woken up again by the same sound, but this time it was louder and more urgent. A growing sense of unease crept over me, and my heart pounded in my chest. I got out of bed and went to the next room, but just like before, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. As I was about to close the door, I suddenly noticed a woman standing in the middle of the room. Her head bowed. She was holding a pair of rusty scissors, the blades dripping with a thick, dark liquid onto the floor. I stood frozen in the doorway, my legs glued to the ground, unable to move. "Who are you? Why are you in my house?" The woman didn't answer. Instead, she slowly lifted her face, and it was no longer intact. Her mouth had been slit open all the way to her ears, and deep scratches covered her face, oozing fresh blood. Terrified, I let out a scream, only to realize I was lying in bed with sunlight streaming in through the window. Was it just a dream? But the fear felt so real, and cold sweat drenched my body. Unable to shake off my unease, I decided to call the landlord to ask about the woman. However, he dismissed my concerns, saying he knew nothing, before hurriedly hanging up. I had a gut feeling that he was hiding something about the history of the house. That night, the events repeated themselves, but this time, the sound seemed to be right next to my ear. Frightened, I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the chilling noise. Moments later, the sound suddenly stopped, and I thought that perhaps it was finally over. But when I opened my eyes, I was horrified to see the woman floating above me on the ceiling, laughing eerily. Her face drew closer and closer, her icy breath sending shivers down my spine. Overcome with terror, I screamed, mustering all my strength to leap out of bed and dash out of the house. Her sinister laughter echoed behind me, following every step I took. That night, I booked a nearby hotel to stay in, desperate to get away from that cursed house. The next morning, as I returned, I ran into a neighbor who had just come back from somewhere. "Hello, ma'am. I just moved into the house across the street."
You live in that house?
"Yes, but I'm planning to move out today. Is there something wrong?"
A long time ago, a woman was brutally murdered by her husband in that house.
Why did her husband do that?
She was having an affair, and when her husband found out, he slit her face and then killed her before turning himself into the police.
I saw her last night. Her face was horrifying.
Ever since she died, she's been haunting that house, scaring off women with beautiful faces like yours.
A chill ran down my spine, sending a wave of goosebumps over my skin.
People often dreamed about magic lamps and 3 wishes. But what if those wishes turned into curses? I was Kevin, an office worker living alone in a small house in the suburbs. That day, on my way home from work, I passed by a roadside dump and was drawn to something glittering in a pile of old junk. It was a porcelain teapot with chipped glaze and faded patterns. But something about it felt like it came from a fairy tale. A faint light seemed to flicker from it, strangely pulling me in. I picked it up, brushed off the dust, and decided to take it home as a decoration for my bedroom. That night, I dreamed of a soft whisper in my ear.
Rub me. 3 wishes will come true.
I jolted awake. The room was still pitch dark. The teapot sat quietly on the shelf. I turned on the light and stared at it, a curious feeling welling up inside me. I picked up the teapot, thinking of the old tales I had read, and rubbed it. Nothing happened. I laughed at myself, feeling silly, and went back to sleep. The next morning, just as I stepped out the gate, the neighbor's dog rushed out, barking furiously.
Why don't you just drop dead?
When I came home that evening, I froze. The dog was lying stiff and lifeless right in front of the house across the street. A strange, indescribable feeling crept over me. Later that night, after a shower, I turned on the TV and began watching the news. They were reporting a terrorist group holding 20 hostages in a shopping mall.
Why not just kill them already? Why bother taking hostages?
And minutes later, the next news update came in. All 20 hostages have been killed for unknown reasons. I shivered, frozen in front of the TV. Could this really be a coincidence? I tried to recall everything and suddenly remembered the teapot and the strange dream from the night before. At that moment, I panicked as I remembered the phone call with my mother at noon. In a fit of anger, I had shouted, "Did you live just to make my life miserable?" I grabbed my phone and called her over and over, but no one answered. In despair, I ran to find the teapot, determined to destroy it. I tore the room apart, but it was gone. The teapot had vanished without a trace. Suddenly, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was a message from my aunt. "Your mom is gone." On her stomach was carved, "Third wish,